Welcome to the WIHS Journal. I'm Jack Pike, your host, and today we will conclude my discussion with Peter Wolfgang, Executive Director of the Family Institute of Connecticut. At the end of our last program, we discussed the attempts to enshrine abortion in the state constitution and force Catholic hospitals to refer for abortion. Today, we pick up the discussion about men participating in women's sports. One of the other things that is really sort of, an avalanche, if you will, around the country, of course, is allowing men to participate in women's sports. And the Title IX law, which I'm hoping that in the new administration, this is going to get turned back. But this is something that you also have, you and Leslie and FIC have worked against in the state to try to fight those rules.
Yeah, so, one of the first and most famous pushbacks against gender ideology in the United States began here in Connecticut with a lawsuit that's still going on. Alliance Defending Freedom is representing a handful of female athletes who have filed suit against the CIAC, which is I would call them quasi-public agency here in Connecticut that controls sporting events. They were upset that biological boys were allowed to compete with them and cost them, they should be in the record books, not the boys. They are the ones that should have scholarship opportunities, not the biological boys. And everyone's passing the buck on this because what the Athletic Association said was, well, we're just following the government because the state government passed a transgender non-discrimination law in 2011. And the government says, well, it's CIAC. They're an independent entity. They're the ones who set the standards. So neither one wants to take responsibility for this, except there's now another question about whether CIAC actually takes something like somewhere in the nature of 7 figures of taxpayer money from Connecticut state taxpayers. And now there's a question of, does that make them a public agency? Are they open to FOIA requests, freedom of information requests? If they are a public agency, then it is the state government that's doing this type of discrimination. But it was FIC that actually first connected some of the plaintiffs in that case with ADF. We helped get the ball rolling on that. And we've done a number of things to ward off similar gender issues at the state legislature, various bills. We exposed the fact that under the cover of darkness in the middle of the night through a budget implementer, the state government, actually the state legislature, passed a law making it harder for detransitioners. This is someone who went through some sort of gender transition, changed his or her mind, and wants to sue the doctor who mutilated them. They actually passed a law in Connecticut. They snuck it in, making it harder for that person to sue the doctor. Yeah. And we exposed that. There was a bill that would have given librarians power over the Board of Education, your elected officials, to decide whether or not child porn should be in the child section of the school library. These are the sort of crazy things that we're fighting at the Capitol. It all sort of overlaps. And we have allies in strange places that you would not expect us to have. On the assisted suicide fight, for many years, we've had left-leaning progressive disability rights allies who don't agree with us on anything else, but are with us in the fight against assisted suicide. Yeah. On the gender stuff, we have activists who identify as gay who hate transgenderism that are now working with us. There's a group called Gays Against Groomers. And look, Family Institute, we were the group that led the fight to try to protect the traditional definition of marriage. We are the tip of the spear against a lot of those agendas. We always have been, we always will be. And now things have gotten so crazy that groups and individuals that identify as gay are right there with us, helping us fight it.
Yeah. I would also, you mentioned ADF. I'd put a little plug in for them for our listeners to look for that. Alliance Defending Freedom, if you want to Google them. They are an amazing, I have met several of the attorneys. We've worked with them through CMDA, and they were the ones that took on Jack Phillips and have defended Jack Phillips out in Colorado, the baker. And so they are just an amazing group to
These
work
folks,
with.
I feel like ADF and people like Jack who are willing to be plaintiffs, or the female athletes here in Connecticut, or Riley Gaines, who's a female athlete on the national level. who's famous for this. These folks, to me, are the ones who are literally saving democracy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the stuff they were trying to do to our country was unbelievable, but heroes rose up and fought back.
Well, that's what you need. You need those people to stand up. I've often thought, even with the men in sports, that if more parents would stand up and say, I'm not letting my daughter swim in this competition or whatever. I don't know, but I mean, that it might be, but it takes people being willing to stand up and not just say, well, we'll let the legislators do it.
Right. Right. I mean, the average individual, the average family, parents, people need to stand up. And if they do, we can win.
Yeah. You and I have worked a lot against assisted suicide in the past. Since 2013, I think it's come
That's
up.
right.
And every year been able to defeat it. Last year they decided not to come after it, thankfully, but they always come back. Compassion Choices is the formerly known as the Hemlock Society. Will be back and marshaling their forces to do it again. It's an awful thing and just growing. If anybody wants to look at this and see what's happening in Canada.
Right.
Canada is becoming the number one country in the world now in euthanasia and putting people to death for mental health reasons, for any other reasons. It's becoming an incredible thing what's going on with them.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I would say on the assisted suicide issue. You're right, Jack. For the first time in many years, they did not raise a bill. They did not hold a public hearing on assisted suicide. But they went into last year's session intending to do that. You may remember, if anything, it was actually one of their biggest PR pushes last year. At this time a year ago, a guy who's actually the head of the pro-assisted suicide lobby was having a much celebrated walk across the state of Connecticut.
Yep.
Oh, and it was in all the media. Oh, the fawning coverage of the walk. There were news articles in the paper. There were clips on the evening news. And then it backfired on them. Two things happened. Number one, a very liberal state legislator named Josh Elliott actually put the other side's strategy right out there.
Yeah.
And we've been saying this forever, and it's different when they say it, when they admit it. But Representative Elliott flat out said, we are going to try to pass a law that that almost no one would be eligible for, just to get our foot in the door, and then we're going to come back and expand it.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the folks on our side were warning about all along. They really need to revise the logic textbooks, because when you study logic, if you're studying like the LSAT to get into law school, you're taught that there are certain things that are logical fallacies, and that one of them is a slippery slope. Well, I think we've lived through enough history at this point to know that the slippery slope is not a logical fallacy. It's happening all the time, especially when the people who intended as their strategy are openly admitting it.
Right.
I mean, that was the reason why that bill was voted down in committee the year before in 2022, or excuse me, in 23. So I just cannot believe that they admitted that in 24. So that already hurt them.
So, Peter, as we close, give us FIC's contact information.
So we are the Family Institute of Connecticut, and our website is ctfamily.org. That's CT as in Connecticut, C as in Carol, T as in Todd, ctfamily.org. All the information is on our website, but I will say, get on our email list. If you're not on Family Institute's email list, and you can sign up on our website, if you're not on that email list, you're missing about 80% of what we're doing. Just reading the website or following us on social media is not enough. You've got to be on our email list.
So thank you for being here today.
Jack, it is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, both you and WIHS.
You have been listening to the last of 3 journal segments from my discussion with Peter Wolfgang, Executive Director of the Family Institute of Connecticut, as we have been talking about the many ethical and moral challenges facing Christian families and the public at large in the state of Connecticut. If you need further help with this information, you may call WIHS during our business hours, 9 to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday at 860-346-1049. The opinions expressed are of the participant and not necessarily the staff or management of WIHS. I'm Jack Pike for WIHS News.